Cosby's lawyers are appealing his sentence, citing 11 alleged errors by the trial judge. That appeal could be filed within the next 30 days. Joining me now, criminal defense attorney Enrique L1 Latoison. Latoison has his own practice, Latoison Law and Media, Delaware County. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Also joining us, attorney Allison Borgatti. She's a former Philadelphia assistant district attorney who's now an associate with Archer and Greiner in Center City. Her focus, white-collar defense, criminal defense, and corruption. Thank you, Allison.
Thanks for having me.
So first, let's talk about what we heard from Andrew Wyatt, who sat down with my colleague Aaron Coleman, and also a message that Bill Cosby gave through Andrew Wyatt to Aaron Coleman. He is insistent. He is not guilty. He's not remorseful. And you heard from Andrew Wyatt just a moment ago that maybe women are lying in this case. Enrique, your thoughts?
Well, we know that Bill Cosby's defense has been very consistent from day one. He's always said he didn't do it. He's never asked for any kind of remorse. He's never asked for any kind of leniency. And, the defense they chose from day one was that the women are lying. And when you stick with that defense, they used it in Cosby 1, they used it in trial number 2, Cosby 2. And he was hung jury number 1, and that seemed to have worked out. And of course, 2, he was found guilty. And he's still sticking with that. He has not changed his position. Mr. Wyatt obviously is just PR guy, so it's his job to put out the story and put out exactly what Mr. Cosby is thinking. My personal opinion is we have to understand that when you are in the state system, you don't have a guarantee to be paroled at your minimum. There's no guarantee there. At some point, he's going to have to be in front of the parole board. And we don't know how the parole board is going to perceive his lack of remorse or his lack of taking responsibility, and that might affect him when he tries to go to get paroled.
I see you nodding here, Allison. I mean, these words that we're hearing from him behind bars, could this have an impact? Could this help or hurt him as his lawyers get ready to move forward with an appeal?
Certainly, and if he was to attend programs while incarcerated, that would benefit him going forward with the parole board. But just because he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years doesn't mean when the clock hits 3, he's getting out. So to the extent that he's not showing any remorse or not taking any steps to better himself while incarcerated, that could very well impact his ability to get out at his minimum, which would be 3 years.
All right, and let's talk about an appeal.
I think some of the big appeal issues that Cosby team is going to be focusing on is 5 witnesses testifying versus 1. And when I say 5 witnesses, I mean 5 other women that were testifying as the acts that took place.
Prior bad act
witnesses. Bad acts.
You had 5 in the second trial,
Absolutely.
Whereas the same judge only said, well, only one person can come forward and testify in the first trial.
And the judge never actually gave a decision on why he did that. And that was a smart move on the judge's part. He's using his discretion at that time to say, we're going to go for 1, we're going to go to 5 now. But since he never actually said why, that is the major appeal issue that they're using.
There are other differences between the first trial and the second trial. Not only how many more women were allowed to testify the second time around, but the judge let in the deposition from the civil lawsuit. So Cosby sat for a deposition when Andrea Constand pursued a civil case against him when originally her case was not going to be tried by the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office back in 2005. And that deposition, he talked about giving quaaludes to women. His words seemed to be damning, so to speak, and hurtful in terms of his defense.
If the evidence suggests that in the past, you did something that was characteristic of the crime in this particular case, which was drugging and providing alcohol to a woman and then engaging in sexual activity, that would tend to prove that you committed the crime in this case. That is what he said in his deposition. It is an admission by the client. It is an admission by Cosby. It's just as much a admission as if he was speaking to the police and gave a statement. And in terms of it being overturned on appeal, it's my opinion that it'll be difficult. They need to find that the trial judge abused his discretion, which is the highest standard. They need to find that but for that testimony being allowed, but for these 5 women testifying in addition to Andrea Constand, they wouldn't have been able to achieve a conviction.
You bring up a very important point. We're talking about him testifying in this deposition. Now we got to remember, how did he end up testifying in this deposition? And these are one of the issues they're bringing up on appeal, is they're saying that Mr. Castor, who was the district attorney at
Bruce
the time.
Castor of Montgomery
yes,
County.
Promised him he was not going to be charged. And not only promised him Mr. Cosby wasn't going to be charged, but he promised him that so that the civil case could move forward with Ms. Constant. So, that's a very interesting point of law here, and I'm very interested to see how this plays out, because this wasn't a assistant district attorney or a low-level district attorney that made this promise to Mr. Cosby. This was the district attorney. So if the district attorney promised you what you took to be his immunity from prosecution so that you would go ahead and open yourself up to cross-examination, the things that
in a civil lawsuit,
in the civil lawsuit, the things that you guys are just talking about, how much he paid her, the things he said, the things that were used against him, you have to wonder, is that allowed? Is that something that should be allowed? Should a district attorney be allowed to basically put you in a position where you let your guard down to give up your Fifth Amendment right to testify in a civil case, then turn around and be prosecuted approximately 12 years, well, longer than 12 years, but that's another issue on appeal, later, and have that used against you by saying that you testified under oath?
I can basically say that I never entered into any type of agreement that wasn't in writing and wasn't brought to the attention of a judge.
When you were a prosecutor in Philadelphia?
I mean, to make an oral agreement, especially an oral agreement that Mr. Cosby relied on, such that he gave a statement incriminating himself and essentially acknowledging committing a crime, it is definitely an issue of first impression that they are considering for the appeal. I can say, though, that there would be no consideration whatsoever on behalf of Mr. Cosby to enter into that Mr. Castor should have put this in writing.
We'll have to see how it plays out. We appreciate your insight, Enrique L1 Latoison and Allison Borgatti. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
What people expect when they come into the office to have their returns done isn't necessarily what happens by the time they leave.
Next on NBC 10 at issue, shrinking returns. Why that tax refund you count on maybe a lot smaller this year. We'll explain why and what you can do about it.